The dog growled at everyone until he saw the boy and lay at his feet like a long-lost friend. The residents of Pinewood called him the Beast. His thunderous bark echoed through the neighborhood, sending children scurrying across the street and forcing mail carriers to toss packages hurriedly over the fence of 1742 Oak Ridge Lane. The massive German Shepherd mix, with his matted black fur and piercing amber eyes, had become something of a local legend, a creature more myth than animal in the whispered stories exchanged on playgrounds and over backyard fences. "That dog's killed before," Billy Thompson would tell the younger kids at Pinewood Elementary, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "My cousin's friend saw him tear apart a burglar. The police had to come with special tranquilizer guns, but they couldn't even lock him up because he's too dangerous." Of course, no one had actually been killed, but the dog's reputation grew with each retelling, each fearful glance, and each wide berth given to the property where he lived behind a weathered wooden fence that seemed perpetually on the verge of collapse. Sarah Chen, the town's only veterinarian, knew better than most the sad reality behind the myth. She had been called to the property exactly once, 3 years ago, shortly after Rex had been acquired by Old Man Miller. The dog had been severely underweight, with scars crisscrossing his muzzle and flanks, telltale signs of his previous life as a fighting dog. After examining the animal, she had strongly recommended behavioral therapy, a proper diet, and regular exercise. Her advice had fallen on deaf ears. "He's a guard dog, not a pet," Miller had grumbled, counting out wrinkled bills from a threadbare wallet. "Just give him his shots and tell me he ain't gonna die." That had been the last time Sarah had been permitted to examine Rex. Since then, she had watched from a distance as the dog's legend grew, knowing that beneath the fearsome reputation was a damaged animal whose aggression stemmed from a life of abuse and neglect. "He's at it again," Margaret Winters complained during her cat's annual checkup. "I can't even enjoy my garden with that monster barking all hours. Someone needs to do something before he hurts someone." Sarah nodded sympathetically as she examined the portly tabby. "Have you tried speaking with Mr. Miller?" Margaret snorted. "That old hermit? He barely opens his door for the delivery boy. Besides, he thinks that Beast is the perfect watchdog. Keeps people away, which is exactly what he wants." Sarah couldn't argue with that assessment. Arthur Miller had become increasingly reclusive over the years, especially since his wife's death a decade ago. The property had fallen into disrepair, with peeling paint and an overgrown yard that had earned him numerous citations from the city. The only thing he seemed to maintain was the fence that kept Rex contained, though maintained might have been a generous description for the haphazard repairs made with whatever scrap wood Miller had on hand. The situation came to a head one sweltering July afternoon when Sarah received an urgent call from Pinewood's police chief, Dave Holloway. "We've got a situation at the Miller place," Dave said, his voice tight. "The dog's gone completely berserk. Neighbors called about the noise, and when my officers arrived, they couldn't even get out of their car. Miller's not answering his door or his phone." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Are you thinking of shooting the dog?" There was a long pause. "We're considering all options, but I thought I'd call you first." "I'll be there in 10 minutes, Sarah said, already reaching for her emergency kit. "Don't do anything until I arrive." By the time Sarah pulled up to Miller's house, a small crowd had gathered at a safe distance. 2 police cruisers blocked the street, their lights flashing silently in the summer heat. The dog's barking was even more frantic than usual, a continuous, desperate sound that raised the hair on Sarah's arms. "He's been like this for hours," Dave said, meeting her at her car. "The neighbors said it started around dawn." Sarah peered toward the house. From where she stood, she could see Rex pacing frantically along the fence line, occasionally throwing himself against the wooden slats with enough force to make them shudder. "Something's wrong," she said. "This isn't normal territorial behavior. He's distressed." "Whatever it is, we need to get him under control," Dave replied. "If that fence gives way—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Given Rex's fearsome reputation, panic would ensue. "Let me try to get closer," Sarah said, reaching into her kit for a sedative. "If I can get a clear shot with the tranquilizer, we can safely restrain him and figure out what's going on." Dave looked skeptical but nodded. "Johnson, get the catch pole from the animal control vehicle. Dr. Chen is going to try to sedate the dog." Sarah approached the fence cautiously, speaking in low, soothing tones despite knowing her words were drowned out by Rex's barking. As she drew closer, she could see the dog more clearly through the gaps in the fence. His fur was raised along his spine, and foam flecked his muzzle, signs of extreme agitation. But something else caught her attention. Rex wasn't looking at her or the gathering crowd. His attention was fixed on the house. With sudden clarity, Sarah understood. "Dave," she called over her shoulder, "we need to check on Mr. Miller right away. I think Rex is trying to alert us to something." The chief hesitated only briefly before nodding to his officers. "Johnson, Taylor, circle around back. Williams, you're with me at the front door." As the officers approached the house, Rex's barking intensified and he raced back and forth between the fence and the front porch, as if trying to guide them. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched the officers knock repeatedly, then finally make the decision to force entry after receiving no response. The minutes that followed were a blur. Paramedics were called. An ambulance arrived with wailing sirens. Arthur Miller was carried out on a stretcher, an oxygen mask covering his weathered face. "Apparent stroke," Sarah overheard one of the paramedics say. "Found unconscious in his kitchen. Could have been there since yesterday." And through it all, Rex had finally fallen silent, watching intently as his owner was loaded into the ambulance. "The dog was trying to get help," Dave said, shaking his head in disbelief as the ambulance pulled away. "All this time, we thought he was just being aggressive." "He probably sensed something was wrong," Sarah explained. "Dogs can detect subtle changes in human behavior and physiology. He knew his owner was in distress, but he had no way to communicate except by making noise." "So what happens to him now?" Dave asked, eyeing Rex, who had retreated to the shade beneath Miller's porch, his energy seemingly spent after his hours-long vigil. "Miller has no family that we know of," one of the officers added. "And with his condition, he might not be coming home anytime soon, if at all." Sarah looked at the exhausted dog. Beneath the matted fur and fearsome reputation was a loyal animal who had done everything in his power to save his owner. Despite years of likely neglect, Rex had remained devoted to the bitter end. "I'll take responsibility for him for now," she heard herself saying. "He'll need to be evaluated properly, but we can't just write him off because of his reputation." Dave gave her a doubtful look. "You sure about this? That dog's not exactly a golden retriever." Sarah watched as Rex finally laid his head down on his paws, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the ambulance had been. "I'm sure," she said. "Everyone deserves a second chance." Getting Rex from Miller's yard to her clinic proved to be a challenge that tested all of Sarah's professional skills. Even with the tranquilizer dart, the massive dog required 3 men to lift onto a makeshift stretcher. His unconscious form barely fit in the back of Sarah's SUV, which she had hurriedly emptied of her equipment. "You're sure about this?" Dave asked again as he helped secure the tailgate. "The shelter could take him, you know." Sarah knew what that meant. With Rex's history and reputation, the overcrowded county shelter would likely deem him unadoptable. The outcome would be inevitable and tragic. "I'm sure," she replied, more confidently than she felt. "I have a large kennel at the clinic. He can stay there until we figure out what's happening with Mr. Miller." Back at Pinewood Veterinary Clinic, Sarah and her assistant Miguel carefully transferred the sedated dog into their largest kennel. Up close, Rex's condition was even worse than Sarah had feared. Beneath the matted fur, his ribs were clearly visible. Old scars crisscrossed his face and flanks, and newer wounds suggested he'd been throwing himself against the fence for some time before today's incident. "Dios mío," Miguel whispered. "What happened to this poor dog?" "Life," Sarah answered grimly. "Probably started with an abusive owner who trained him to fight, then ended up with a neglectful one who saw him as nothing but a deterrent on four legs." Once Rex was secured in the kennel, Sarah performed a thorough examination. Besides the malnutrition and wounds, she discovered a host of other issues: dental disease, ear infections, and arthritis that was unusual for a dog his age, likely the result of old injuries that had never properly healed. "He's only about 5 years old," she told Miguel as she entered her findings into Rex's newly created chart. "But his body shows the wear and tear of a much older dog. Will he recover?" Sarah sighed. "Physically, with proper care, yes. But emotionally, that's harder to predict. Dogs like Rex carry invisible scars that sometimes never heal." By evening, the sedative had begun to wear off. Sarah sent Miguel home but stayed behind to monitor Rex's return to consciousness. She dimmed the lights in the kennel area and played soft classical music, techniques she often used to reduce stress in her patients. When Rex finally opened his eyes, the transformation was immediate and alarming. From groggy confusion, he exploded into a frenzy of barking and lunging against the kennel door. The sturdy metal cage rattled but held firm as Rex threw his full weight against it repeatedly. "Easy, Rex," Sarah called, maintaining a safe distance. "You're safe here." The dog paid no attention to her words, his eyes wild with panic as he searched for an escape. Sarah had expected this reaction. Removed from his territory and placed in a strange environment, Rex was experiencing intense fear, and like many abused animals, his fear manifested as aggression. For over an hour, Rex continued his frantic attempts to escape, pausing only when exhaustion momentarily overcame his panic. Sarah remained nearby, speaking in calm, measured tones, occasionally tossing high-value treats into the kennel whenever Rex showed even the slightest decrease in his aggressive display. By midnight, the dog had finally collapsed in the far corner of the kennel, his sides heaving with exertion. Though still alert and growling softly whenever Sarah moved, he seemed to have accepted, at least temporarily, that he couldn't break free. "Small victories," Sarah murmured, settling into the chair she'd positioned near the kennel. She hadn't planned on spending the night at the clinic, but leaving Rex alone in his current state wasn't an option. She'd called her neighbor to check on her cat and prepared for a long, uncomfortable night. The following morning brought unexpected news. Dave called early to inform her that Arthur Miller had died in the hospital overnight. The elderly man had suffered a massive stroke, and despite the medical team's efforts, they hadn't been able to save him. "So what happens to the dog now?" Dave asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Sarah glanced at Rex, who was watching her warily from his kennel. He had accepted food from a long-handled utensil but still growled whenever anyone approached too closely. "I'll keep him for now," she said. "He needs extensive rehabilitation, and I can't in good conscience send him to a shelter." "You're a good person, Sarah," Dave replied, "but that dog's got a reputation in this town. People are already asking what's going to happen to the beast." After hanging up, Sarah sat heavily in her office chair. What had she gotten herself into? Her small clinic was barely breaking even, and taking on a project like Rex required resources she didn't have, not just money for his medical care, but time for the intensive behavioral rehabilitation he would need. "Looks like it's just you and me for now," she told Rex as she prepared his morning medications. The dog watched her every move, his amber eyes following her with suspicious intensity. Over the next week, a routine developed. Sarah would arrive early to care for Rex before her regular patients arrived. Miguel, initially wary, gradually began to assist with the dog's care, though Rex still wouldn't allow either of them to touch him. Evenings were devoted to behavioral exercises, simple things at first, like teaching Rex that humans approaching his kennel meant good things: food, fresh water, and treats. Progress was painfully slow. By the end of the second week, Rex would take treats directly from Sarah's hand, though his body remained tense, ready to retreat at the slightest unexpected movement. His physical condition was improving with proper nutrition and medication, but his emotional wounds remained raw and exposed. Word about the beast taking up residence at Pinewood Veterinary Clinic spread quickly through town. Some clients expressed concern about bringing their pets to a place that housed such a notorious dog. Others were simply curious, asking to see Rex during their appointments, requests that Sarah firmly denied. "He's not a sideshow attraction," she explained to one particularly insistent client. "He's a traumatized animal who needs peace and consistency to recover." On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, as Sarah was finishing up with her last appointment of the day, the clinic door swung open, bringing with it a gust of wind and a small, drenched figure. Emma Wilson, 10 years old and small for her age, stood dripping on the welcome mat, her school backpack clutched to her chest. "Emma?" Sarah set down her clipboard. "What are you doing here? Where's your mom?" "She's at work," Emma replied, pushing her wet hair from her face. Emma's mother, Lisa Wilson, was a single parent who worked long hours at the local hospital. "I was supposed to go to Mrs. Grayson's after school, but she had an emergency. Her daughter came to get her." Sarah frowned. Mrs. Grayson was in her 70s and occasionally watched Emma after school. "So you walked here? In this weather?" Emma nodded. "I thought maybe I could help with the animals until Mom finishes her shift. She gets off at 7. Sarah glanced at her watch. Nearly 3 hours. She should call Lisa, but she knew the hospital was perpetually understaffed, and Lisa couldn't simply leave her post. "Does your mom know where you are?" "I texted her that I was going somewhere safe," Emma admitted. "I didn't want her to worry." Sarah sighed. "Let me call her to make sure it's okay for you to stay here, and let's get you dried off." After a brief conversation with Lisa, who was profusely apologetic and grateful, Sarah provided Emma with a towel and a spare scrub top that hung like a dress on her small frame. While her clothes tumbled in the clinic's dryer, Emma sat in Sarah's office, sipping hot chocolate and watching the rain streak down the windows. "Is it true that you have the beast here?" Emma asked suddenly, her eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah hesitated. "We have a dog named Rex who's staying with us for a while. He's the dog that used to live at Mr. Miller's house." "Billy Thompson says he ate someone once," Emma said matter-of-factly. "But Billy makes up stuff all the time. Last year he said he saw a ghost in the school bathroom, but it was just steam from the broken radiator." Despite herself, Sarah smiled. "No, Rex hasn't eaten anyone. He's actually very scared and doesn't know how to tell people that, so he acts mean instead." Emma considered this information thoughtfully. "Can I see him?" "That's not a good idea," Sarah replied quickly. "Rex isn't comfortable around people yet. He needs lots of space and quiet." But even as she spoke, Sarah could see the curiosity burning in Emma's eyes, a curiosity that she suspected wouldn't be easily extinguished. Emma's fascination with Rex only grew over the following days. With Mrs. Grayson recovering from a fall and summer vacation having officially begun, the clinic became Emma's default after-school destination. Lisa had offered profuse apologies and promises to find alternative arrangements, but Sarah had surprised herself by suggesting that Emma could continue coming to the clinic. "She's no trouble," Sarah assured Lisa. "Actually, she's been helping Miguel with the smaller animals. She has a real way with them." This was true. Emma had quickly proven herself useful with basic tasks around the clinic, filling water bowls, folding clean towels, and even helping to calm nervous cats awaiting their appointments. What Sarah didn't mention was Emma's persistent interest in Rex, whose kennel was situated in the back room, away from the regular clinic traffic. "Has he eaten today?" Emma would ask, or, "Did Rex get his medicine?" Each question delivered with casual innocence that didn't quite mask her underlying curiosity. Sarah had been firm about keeping Emma away from Rex. Despite small improvements in his behavior, he now accepted food without growling and occasionally wagged his tail when Sarah entered the room. Rex remained unpredictable. The risk was simply too great. Or so she thought, until the afternoon she found Emma sitting cross-legged on the floor outside Rex's kennel, reading aloud from a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. "Emma," Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. "What are you doing? Get away from there right now." Emma looked up calmly, marking her place with a finger. "I'm reading to Rex. Miguel said it was okay as long as I stayed on this side of the yellow line." She pointed to the caution tape Sarah had placed 3 feet from the kennel. Sarah glanced quickly at Rex, expecting to see the familiar signs of agitation: raised hackles, bared teeth, tense posture. Instead, the dog lay with his head on his paws, his amber eyes fixed on Emma with what looked remarkably like interest. "Miguel shouldn't have," Sarah began, then stopped. Rex's ears were perked forward, his body language more relaxed than she had ever seen it. "How long have you been reading to him?" Emma shrugged. "About 20 minutes. I started with Harry Potter, but I think he likes this better." He stopped pacing when I got to the part about Wilbur meeting Charlotte. Sarah approached cautiously, expecting Rex to revert to his defensive behavior. Remarkably, the dog merely glanced at her before returning his attention to Emma. "He likes the sound of your voice," Sarah said, genuinely astonished. In 3 weeks of intensive work, she hadn't achieved the level of calm that Emma had apparently managed in 20 minutes. Emma beamed with pride. "Can I keep reading to him tomorrow?" Sarah should have said no. Every professional instinct warned against allowing a child near a dog with Rex's history. Yet something about the scene before her, the small girl with her book and the massive dog watching her with unexpected gentleness, gave her pause. "We'll see," she said finally. "But only with supervision, okay? And you have to promise to stay behind the yellow line." Emma readily agreed, her face lighting up. "I'll bring better books tomorrow. Maybe he'd like Because of Winn-Dixie. That one's about a dog." That night, Sarah found herself unable to sleep, her mind replaying the unexpected tableau at the clinic. In her 15 years as a veterinarian, she had worked with numerous aggressive dogs, but none had responded quite like Rex had to Emma. There was something about the girl, a gentleness, a lack of fear or judgment, that seemed to bypass Rex's defenses in a way that Sarah's professional techniques had failed to do. The next day, Sarah observed closely as Emma resumed her reading position outside Rex's kennel. This time she had brought 3 books, carefully selected for what she explained were dog-appropriate themes. "This one's about a lost dog finding his way home," Emma explained seriously, holding up a paperback with a tattered cover. "I thought Rex might like that since he doesn't have a home right now." For nearly an hour, Emma read steadily, her clear voice giving life to the adventures of a lost border collie journeying across the country. Rex remained attentive throughout, his eyes rarely leaving the small figure beyond the yellow line. When Emma reached a particularly tense moment in the story, Rex edged closer to the kennel door, as if eager to hear what happened next. "I think he really understands," Emma whispered excitedly to Sarah. "Look how he's listening." Sarah wasn't entirely convinced that Rex was following the plot, but there was no denying that something remarkable was happening. The same dog who had lunged and snarled at adult visitors was displaying nothing but gentle interest in this small human. Over the next week, Emma's reading sessions became a regular feature of Rex's day. Sarah adjusted the clinic schedule to ensure she could supervise, and even Miguel, initially skeptical, had to admit that Rex's behavior was showing marked improvement. "It's like he's a different dog when she's here," Miguel commented, watching through the observation window as Emma acted out a scene from her book, complete with different voices for each character. Rex followed her movements, his tail occasionally thumping against the kennel floor. "I've never seen anything like it." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "There are cases in the literature about children having success with animals that are aggressive toward adults. Children move differently, sound different, they're less threatening. Plus, Emma's got that special something," Miguel added. "That thing you can't teach, a natural way with animals." The breakthrough came on a sweltering July afternoon, exactly 1 month after Rex had arrived at the clinic. Emma was reading as usual, this time a story about a police dog who solved mysteries, when Rex did something unprecedented. He brought his favorite toy, a worn tennis ball that had been in his kennel since his arrival, and pushed it with his nose toward the kennel door, as close to Emma as he could get it. Emma stopped reading mid-sentence. "Dr. Chen," she whispered loudly, though Rex could clearly hear her. "He wants to play." Sarah, who had been updating charts nearby, approached cautiously. "Keep reading, Emma. Let's not make too big a deal about it yet." But Emma, with a child's intuition, understood what Rex needed better than any adult could have. She simply acknowledged the offering with a smile. "That's a nice ball, Rex. Maybe someday we can play with it together." Then she resumed reading, leaving the ball where it lay. Rex seemed satisfied with this response. He settled back down, but notably closer to the kennel door than he had ever voluntarily positioned himself before. That evening, after Emma had gone home, Sarah stayed late at the clinic, contemplating the day's events. Rex watched her from his kennel, his expression alert but no longer hostile. "What is it about her?" Sarah asked aloud, not expecting an answer. "What does she have that the rest of us don't?" Rex tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. Then he turned in a circle and settled on his bed, his message clear. The conversation was over for now. The next day brought another milestone. As Emma read, Rex brought not just the ball but every item in his kennel, his blanket, his water bowl, even the rubber Kong toy that Sarah had filled with frozen peanut butter, and arranged them all by the kennel door. "He's sharing his treasures," Sarah realized aloud. "It's a sign of trust." Emma nodded solemnly. "Can I give him something too?" Sarah hesitated. "What did you have in mind?" From her backpack, Emma produced a small, handmade bracelet of braided embroidery floss. "I made this last night. It's a friendship bracelet. I thought maybe we could hang it on his kennel so he knows we're friends." The gesture was so innocent, so pure in its intention, that Sarah felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "I think that's a lovely idea. Would you like me to attach it for you?" Emma passed the bracelet through the yellow caution tape. As Sarah approached the kennel, Rex watched intently but showed no signs of his former aggression. She tied the colorful bracelet to the outside of his kennel door, where he could see it, but not reach it to chew. "There," Sarah said. "Now everyone will know that Rex has a friend." Emma beamed, and to Sarah's amazement, Rex's tail began to wag, not the hesitant, uncertain movement they had occasionally observed, but a genuine, joyful expression of canine happiness. Something fundamental had changed. The beast of Pinewood was beginning to fade, and in his place, the real Rex was slowly emerging, a dog capable of trust, of connection, perhaps even of love. News of Rex's transformation spread through Pinewood like wildfire. What had begun as concerned inquiries about the beast taking up residence at the veterinary clinic evolved into fascinated questions about the unlikely friendship between the feared dog and a 10-year-old girl. Sarah found herself fielding questions from clients, neighbors, and even strangers who stopped her in the grocery store. "Is it true that little Emma Wilson tamed the beast?" Mrs. Winters asked during her cat's follow-up appointment, her eyes wide with curiosity. Margaret Winters, the same woman who had complained about Rex's incessant barking just weeks earlier. "Rex was never a beast," Sarah corrected gently. "He's a dog who's been through a lot of trauma, and Emma didn't tame him. She's helping him learn to trust again." The distinction seemed lost on most people, who preferred the more dramatic narrative of a fearsome monster subdued by the innocent kindness of a child. Sarah couldn't entirely blame them. The reality that rehabilitation was a slow, painstaking process filled with setbacks and tiny victories didn't make for compelling town gossip. The truth was that despite the breakthrough with Emma, Rex still had a long way to go. He remained wary of most adults, especially men, and still showed signs of anxiety when faced with new situations. But the changes, though gradual, were undeniable. He no longer lunged at the kennel door when Sarah or Miguel approached. He took treats gently from their hands, and most remarkably, he had begun to wag his tail when Emma arrived each day, a small gesture that nonetheless represented a monumental shift in his emotional state. Sarah had consulted with Dr. Patel, a veterinary behaviorist in the city, sending videos of Rex's interactions with Emma and detailed notes on his progress. Dr. Patel's assessment had been cautiously optimistic. "What you're seeing is a remarkable case of natural affinity," she had explained during their phone consultation. "This child somehow represents safety to this dog, perhaps because she's physically non-threatening, or because she approached him without the baggage of fear or expectation that adults carry. But remember, one positive relationship doesn't mean he's ready for general adoption. He still needs intensive rehabilitation." This reminder weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she watched Emma reading to Rex one sunny afternoon in late July. The girl had convinced Sarah to move a small chair inside the yellow caution line, allowing her to sit closer to the kennel, though still well out of reach if Rex were to suddenly revert to his defensive behavior. "And then the dog saved the entire family from the fire," Emma read, her voice animated as she reached the climax of the story. "Even though they had left him behind when they moved, he still loved them enough to warn them about the danger." Rex listened attentively, his head resting on his paws, his eyes following Emma's every gesture. The bond between them was almost palpable, a delicate thread of trust spun from countless hours of quiet companionship. "Dr. Chen," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her book, "I think Rex is ready to come out of his kennel." Sarah, who had been updating files at a nearby desk, felt her stomach drop. "Emma, that's not a decision we can make lightly. Rex has made wonderful progress, but he's sad in there," Emma interrupted, an unusual note of frustration in her voice. "Look at him. He wants to play and run and do dog things. He brings me his ball every day, but we can't really play with it while he's locked up." Sarah approached carefully, studying Rex. The dog did indeed look different from the aggressive, fearful animal that had arrived at the clinic. His coat, once matted and dull, now gleamed with health. The wounds on his muzzle and flanks had healed, and he had gained weight, his ribs no longer visible beneath his fur. Physically, he was a picture of canine health. But psychologically, "It's not that simple," Sarah tried to explain. "Rex still gets very nervous around new people and situations. If something startles him while he's out, he might react defensively." Emma's small face took on a stubborn expression that Sarah was beginning to recognize. "He won't hurt me. He knows I'm his friend." "I believe you," Sarah said gently. "But my job is to keep both of you safe, and I need to be absolutely certain before we take that step." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miguel, who poked his head into the room. "Sarah, you have a call. It's Dave Holloway." With a reassuring smile to Emma, Sarah stepped out to take the call, wondering what the police chief wanted. She hadn't heard from him since the initial days after Miller's death. "Sarah," Dave's voice came through clearly, his tone professional but friendly. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. The county is finally moving forward with clearing out old Miller's property. They've been waiting for any relatives to come forward, but it looks like there weren't any. They'll start demolition of the house next week." Demolition? Sarah was surprised. The house was dilapidated, certainly, but demolition seemed extreme. "Place is a hazard," Dave explained. "Mold, structural issues, you name it. Cheaper to tear it down than fix it. Anyway, I wanted to check in about the dog. Any decisions about what happens to him long term?" Sarah glanced through the window at Rex and Emma. The girl had resumed reading, and Rex was watching her with that attentive expression that still amazed Sarah every time she saw it. "We're still working on his rehabilitation," she said carefully. "He's made significant progress, but he's not ready for adoption yet, if that's even the right path for him." Dave's sigh was audible through the phone. "Look, Sarah, I know you're doing great work with him, but the town council's been asking questions. Having the beast at your clinic indefinitely is making some folks nervous. They're wondering if there's an end game here." The pressure didn't surprise Sarah. Small towns had long memories, and despite Rex's progress, many people in Pinewood still saw him as the fearsome guard dog who had terrorized the neighborhood for years. "I understand," she said. "Give me a little more time. We're making real breakthroughs." After hanging up, Sarah returned to find Emma packing up her books, her reading session apparently complete for the day. "My mom's picking me up early today," she explained. "We're going to visit my grandma this weekend, so I won't be back until Monday." Sarah nodded, trying not to show her concern. The daily reading sessions had become a cornerstone of Rex's rehabilitation. How would he respond to Emma's 3-day absence? As if reading her thoughts, Emma turned to Rex. "I'll be back on Monday, Rex. Dr. Chen will take good care of you, and I'll bring you a new book when I get back." Rex's ears perked up at the sound of his name, but there was a new alertness to his posture, as if he sensed something was different about today's departure. After Emma left, Sarah spent extra time with Rex, talking to him softly and offering his favorite treats, but the dog seemed subdued, lying in his kennel with his head on his paws, occasionally glancing toward the door as if expecting Emma to return. "She'll be back on Monday," Sarah assured him, not entirely convinced that he understood. "It's just a weekend." That night, as Sarah was preparing to leave, she made a decision. Instead of heading home, she gathered some paperwork, ordered takeout, and set up camp in her office. Something told her that Rex shouldn't be alone tonight, even if all she could offer was her presence in the building. Around midnight, she was awakened from a light doze by a sound from the kennel area, a high-pitched whine that quickly escalated into frantic barking. Sarah rushed to check on Rex and found him pacing his kennel, clearly agitated. "It's okay, boy," she soothed, but Rex paid no attention, continuing to bark and throw himself against the kennel door. It was a disturbing echo of his behavior the day Miller had been found. Sarah checked the kennel carefully, looking for anything that might have triggered his distress, a strange sound, an unfamiliar smell, even a mouse or insect that could have startled him. Finding nothing obvious, she sat on the floor near the kennel, speaking calmly and continuously, hoping her presence would eventually soothe him. It took nearly an hour for Rex to exhaust himself. When he finally lay down, it was with his back to Sarah, his body language communicating clear distress. Something had changed, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to Emma's absence. What had seemed like a promising trajectory of healing now felt precarious, balanced on the delicate relationship between a traumatized dog and a young girl whose life was full of its own uncertainties. As Sarah returned to her makeshift bed in the office, she wondered if she had been too optimistic about Rex's progress. and what Monday would reveal about the true nature of his transformation. Saturday morning arrived with a torrential summer downpour that matched Sarah's mood. Rex had barely touched his breakfast, a worrying development for a dog who had always eaten eagerly despite his other issues. He lay in his kennel, eyes fixed on the door, his body tense with anticipation. "She's not coming today, buddy," Sarah said gently, knowing her words meant little to the anxious dog. "Remember? Emma's visiting her grandmother." Rex's ears twitched at the sound of Emma's name, but otherwise he remained motionless, his vigilant posture a silent testimony to his distress. Miguel arrived at 9, shaking rain from his jacket as he entered. "How's our patient this morning?" "Not great," Sarah admitted. "He didn't eat, and he's been watching the door since dawn. I think he's waiting for Emma." Miguel frowned. "That's not good. Should we call her? Maybe if she spoke to him on the phone." Sarah shook her head. "I don't want to disrupt her family weekend. Besides, we need to know if Rex can handle separation from Emma. If his entire rehabilitation depends solely on her presence, we have a bigger problem than I thought." The day progressed with a steady stream of appointments, routine vaccinations, a cat with a urinary infection, a parakeet with overgrown claws. Between patients, Sarah checked on Rex, each time finding him in the same vigilant pose, his food untouched, his water barely disturbed. By afternoon, Sarah's concern had deepened. She canceled her last 2 appointments and focused entirely on Rex, attempting various strategies to engage him. She brought his tennis ball, rolling it just outside his kennel. She offered high-value treats, bits of chicken and cheese that would normally have him salivating. She even played recordings of Emma's voice that she had captured during previous reading sessions. Nothing worked. Rex acknowledged her presence with brief glances, but remained fixated on the door, his body language communicating a singular message: waiting. "This isn't just separation anxiety," Sarah told Miguel as they closed the clinic that evening. "It's like he's shut down completely without her." "Maybe he thinks she's abandoned him," Miguel suggested, "like everyone else in his life." The thought had occurred to Sarah as well. Dogs like Rex, who had experienced multiple traumas and abandonments, often developed profound attachment issues. Had they inadvertently created a situation where Rex's emotional stability depended entirely on a 10-year-old girl? "I'll stay again tonight," Sarah decided. "I don't want him to be alone if he gets distressed like last night." Sure enough, around 2 a.m., Rex began the same agitated behavior, pacing, whining, occasionally throwing himself against the kennel door. This time, however, Sarah tried something different. Instead of remaining outside the kennel, speaking soothingly, she made a bold decision. Gathering a blanket and pillow from her office, she entered the small room that housed Rex's kennel. Maintaining a safe distance, she set up her makeshift bed on the floor, close enough that Rex could see and smell her, but far enough away that he wouldn't feel threatened. "I'm here, Rex," she said softly. "You're not alone." Rex froze, watching her with intense amber eyes. For several minutes, neither moved. Then, slowly, Rex approached the kennel door, his nose working overtime as he took in her scent. Sarah remained still, allowing him to process this new development at his own pace. Eventually, Rex returned to his bed, but this time, instead of turning his back, he lay facing Sarah, his eyes never leaving her form. It wasn't the relaxed posture she had hoped for, but it was something, an acknowledgement of her presence, perhaps even an acceptance of her as a temporary substitute for Emma. Sarah didn't sleep much that night, but neither did she regret her decision. Something subtle had shifted in her relationship with Rex. By morning, when she offered him his breakfast, he finally ate, though with less enthusiasm than usual. "Small victories," she murmured, echoing her words from his first night at the clinic. Sunday brought more rain and a quieter clinic with only emergency appointments scheduled. Sarah spent most of the day near Rex, working on her laptop while he dozed fitfully. By evening, his vigilance had diminished somewhat, though he still perked up hopefully whenever the clinic door opened. "One more night," Sarah told him as she settled again on her makeshift floor bed. "Emma will be back tomorrow." Around midnight, Sarah was awakened by a strange sound, not the distressed whining she had come to expect, but something softer. Opening her eyes, she found Rex pressed against the kennel door, watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. He made the sound again, a soft whimper that seemed almost conversational. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Rex responded by placing his paw against the kennel door, his eyes locked with hers. The gesture was so human-like, so deliberate that Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if he were reaching out to her, asking for something beyond food or water. Companionship, Sarah realized. You just don't want to be alone. Acting on instinct rather than professional judgment, Sarah moved her blanket closer to the kennel, not touching it, but close enough that Rex could sense her warmth. The dog watched her every move, his body tense but not fearful. "It's okay," she assured him. "I'm not going anywhere." Gradually, Rex settled, mirroring her position on his side of the barrier. For the first time since Emma's departure, his posture relaxed completely, his breathing deepening into the rhythm of peaceful sleep. Sarah watched him for a long time before drifting off herself, marveling at the complexity of the animal before her. Rex wasn't simply a case study in rehabilitation. He was an individual with deep emotional needs and the capacity for profound connection. If only she could help the rest of Pinewood see what she was beginning to understand. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, the weekend's rain giving way to brilliant sunshine. Sarah awoke to find Rex already alert, his breakfast eaten, his demeanor noticeably brighter. Whether it was the breakthrough of the night before or some innate knowledge that Emma would return today, his mood had clearly improved. "Someone's feeling better," Miguel observed when he arrived. "Did something happen?" Sarah described the night's events, careful to frame them in professional terms rather than the emotional experience it had been for her. "I think he's beginning to form attachments beyond just Emma. It's a positive development." Miguel looked skeptical. "Don't get me wrong, I'm glad he's doing better. But one good night doesn't mean he's ready for wider social interaction. What happens when Emma's school starts again in September? Or if her mom gets a different job and they move away?" These were valid concerns, ones that Sarah had been grappling with herself. Rex's attachment to Emma was beautiful, but problematic in its intensity. True rehabilitation meant helping him develop a wider range of healthy relationships and coping mechanisms. "We'll cross those bridges when we come to them," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "For now, let's focus on today's progress." The morning passed quickly with a full schedule of appointments. Sarah found herself frequently checking the time, aware that Emma typically arrived around 3 o'clock after spending the morning at her summer reading program at the library. At 2:45, Sarah was finishing up with a routine vaccine appointment when the clinic door burst open with such force that the bell above it jangled wildly. Lisa Wilson stood in the doorway, her face ashen, her hospital scrubs wrinkled as if she'd been wearing them for days. "Lisa?" Sarah handed the Yorkie she'd been examining back to its owner and moved quickly to the front. "What's wrong? Where's Emma?" "There's been an accident," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "Emma's in the hospital. She was hit by a car while crossing the street outside the library. She's asking for you and for Rex. She won't calm down. The doctors had to sedate her, but she keeps saying she needs to see the dog." Sarah felt the room tilt slightly, her professional demeanor temporarily shaken by the news. "How bad is it?" Broken leg, concussion, lots of cuts and bruises. They're keeping her for observation because of the head injury. Lisa wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I know it's crazy to ask, but is there any way? Could Rex possibly visit her? The nurses said therapy dogs are sometimes allowed, and Emma is so fixated on seeing him. Sarah glanced toward the back room where Rex waited in his kennel, blissfully unaware of the crisis unfolding. The request was not just unusual, it was potentially dangerous. Rex had never left the clinic since his arrival. His reactions to new environments, strange people, the sights and smells of a hospital, all were complete unknowns. Lisa, I understand why you're asking, but Rex isn't a trained therapy dog. He's made progress, but he's still unpredictable in new situations. It could be risky. Please. Lisa's voice cracked with desperation. You didn't see her, Sarah. The way she was crying for him before they sedated her. I've never seen her like that. Behind them, the Yorkie's owner cleared her throat awkwardly. Excuse me, but are you talking about the Beast? The dog that little girl has been helping? Sarah winced at the nickname, but nodded. My niece is a nurse at County General, the woman offered. I could call her, see if they could make special arrangements. Maybe a private room, away from the general population. Sarah looked from the client to Lisa's desperate face, weighing impossible variables. Rex's rehabilitation, Emma's well-being, the safety of hospital staff and patients, her own professional reputation. Let me check on Rex, she said finally. I need to see where he's at today before I can make any decisions. As she headed toward the back room, Sarah's mind raced with contingency plans and worst-case scenarios. Could Rex handle such a dramatic change in environment? Would seeing Emma in a hospital bed, injured, smelling of antiseptic and fear, trigger his defensive behaviors? And yet, how could she deny this request when Emma had given so much of herself to help Rex heal? Sarah found Rex alert and attentive, standing at the kennel door as if he somehow sensed that something important was happening. When she entered the room, he watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, his head tilted slightly in a gesture that seemed almost questioning. Hey boy, she said softly, approaching the kennel. Emma's had an accident. She needs your help. Rex's ears perked up at Emma's name, and he gave a small whine, pressing his nose against the kennel door. For several minutes, Sarah stood there, studying the dog she had come to know so well over the past weeks. Rex had made remarkable progress. There was no denying that. But a hospital visit was far beyond anything they had attempted in his rehabilitation. It wasn't just a question of whether Rex could handle it, but whether Sarah could responsibly put hospital staff, patients, and even Emma herself in a potentially volatile situation. And yet, as she watched Rex's expectant face, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was a crucial moment in his journey, perhaps in both their journeys. We'll need some ground rules, Sarah said, returning to the waiting room where Lisa still stood, anxiously checking her phone for updates from the hospital. I can't make any promises, but I'm willing to try. Relief flooded Lisa's face. Thank you, Sarah. What do you need? A private entrance, if possible. A quiet room away from the main hospital traffic. And I'll need to bring him in a secure harness with a muzzle, not because I think he'll bite, but as a precaution that the hospital will likely require. The Yorkie's owner, who had lingered to help, was already on the phone with her niece relaying these requirements. After several minutes of negotiation, a plan began to take shape. They can arrange for you to enter through the staff entrance near the pediatric wing, the woman reported. Emma's been moved to a private room at the end of the hall. The head nurse said they'll clear the corridor for 5 minutes when you arrive. Sarah nodded, her mind racing through the logistics. I'll need to prepare Rex. Lisa, you should go back to Emma. Tell her we're going to try to visit, but please make sure she understands it might not work out. After Lisa left, Sarah turned to Miguel. "Can you handle the clinic for the rest of the day? I'm going to need to focus entirely on Rex." "Of course," Miguel agreed, his expression serious. "Do you really think this will work?" "Honestly, I have no idea, but I know we have to try." The next hour was a flurry of preparation. Sarah gathered the equipment she would need. A secure harness she had specially ordered for Rex but hadn't yet used, a basket muzzle that would allow him to pant but prevent any biting, a favorite blanket from his kennel that carried his scent, and a bag of high-value treats to reward calm behavior. The most challenging part would be getting Rex into her car. He hadn't been in a vehicle since the day he arrived at the clinic, and that had been while sedated. Sarah considered administering a mild anti-anxiety medication but ultimately decided against it. She needed Rex alert and able to respond to her cues. "Okay, boy," she said, approaching his kennel with the harness. "This is going to be different, but I need you to trust me." To her surprise, Rex allowed her to fit the harness without protest, watching her movements with alert curiosity rather than fear. The muzzle was more challenging. He initially backed away, clearly uncomfortable with having something placed over his muzzle. "I know, I don't like it either," Sarah soothed, "but it's just for a little while." With patient coaxing and plenty of treats, she finally secured the muzzle. Rex shook his head several times, trying to dislodge the unfamiliar item, but eventually seemed to accept its presence. The walk to her SUV was tense. Sarah had chosen a time when the clinic waiting room was empty, and Miguel held the doors open so she could focus entirely on Rex. Outside, the summer heat hit them like a wall, and Rex hesitated on the threshold, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of new sensations, the sounds of traffic, the smells of the street, the feeling of pavement beneath his paws instead of the clinic's familiar tile. "It's okay," Sarah encouraged, keeping the leash loose but secure. "Just a few steps to the car." Rex followed hesitantly, his body tense but not panicked. When they reached the SUV, Sarah opened the back hatch where she had already prepared a space with familiar bedding from his kennel. "Up we go," she said, patting the edge of the vehicle. Rex looked at her, then at the SUV, clearly uncertain. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse, which would end their hospital visit before it began. Then, with a graceful leap that belied his size, Rex jumped into the back, immediately turning to face her, as if seeking reassurance. "Good boy," Sarah praised, her relief evident. "Such a good boy." The drive to County General took 15 minutes, during which Sarah maintained a steady stream of calm conversation, glancing frequently in the rearview mirror to check on Rex. He remained alert but composed, occasionally whining softly when they stopped at traffic lights, but otherwise handling the journey better than she had dared to hope. At the hospital, Sarah followed the directions she had been given, pulling up to a service entrance where a nurse in blue scrubs waited. Rex tensed at the sight of the stranger, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Easy," Sarah murmured. "We're here to see Emma, remember?" At the sound of Emma's name, Rex's demeanor shifted slightly, his focus redirecting from the nurse to Sarah. "You must be Dr. Chen," the nurse said, maintaining a respectful distance from the vehicle. "I'm Nurse Jenkins. We've cleared the corridor as requested. Emma's in room 412 at the end of the pediatric wing." Sarah nodded gratefully. "How is she?" "Awake now and very excited about your visit. Her vitals have improved just knowing you're coming." The nurse glanced at Rex with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "That's him? The famous beast of Pinewood?" "His name is Rex," Sarah corrected gently. "And yes, this is him." Getting Rex out of the car and into the hospital proved less challenging than Sarah had anticipated. The dog seemed to understand that something important was happening, following her closely with minimal hesitation. The nurse led them through quiet service corridors, avoiding the busier parts of the hospital. As they approached room 412, Sarah could feel Rex's energy changing, his body becoming more alert, his nose working overtime. Did he somehow sense that Emma was nearby? The research on dogs' ability to recognize individual human scents, even in complex environments like hospitals, was compelling. Outside Emma's door, Sarah paused, suddenly gripped by doubt. What if Rex reacted badly to seeing Emma injured? What if the unfamiliar hospital equipment triggered his fear responses? "Dr. Chen?" The nurse looked at her questioningly. "Is everything okay?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Just preparing. This is his first time in a new environment since his rehabilitation began." "Emma's mother is in there with her," the nurse explained. "I've asked her to sit in the chair by the window, giving you space to manage the dog's approach to the bed." Sarah nodded gratefully for the thoughtful arrangement. "Okay, Rex," she said softly. "Let's go see Emma." As the door swung open, the hospital room came into view. It was small but private, with a single bed where Emma lay, her small form partially obscured by a cast on her left leg and bandages on her arms. Her face, though bruised on one side, lit up with joy when she saw them. "Rex," she called, her voice hoarse but excited. "You came." Rex froze in the doorway, his entire body tense as he took in the scene. The unfamiliar room, the medical equipment, the beeping monitors, and most significantly, Emma's altered appearance. Sarah held her breath, ready to retreat if he showed any signs of aggression or extreme fear. For several seconds, no one moved. Then Rex took a tentative step forward, his nose twitching as he processed the complex mixture of scents. Another step, then another. His focus remained entirely on Emma, as if the rest of the room had faded away. When he reached the side of the bed, he stretched his neck forward, sniffing carefully at Emma's hand that rested on the blanket. The girl remained still, allowing him to investigate at his own pace, though her eyes shone with barely contained excitement. "Hi, boy," she whispered. "I missed you." In response, Rex did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He gently rested his muzzled chin on the edge of the bed, as close to Emma's hand as he could get without actually touching her, and let out a deep sigh that seemed to release weeks of tension. His entire body relaxed, and his tail began to wag in slow, gentle sweeps. From her chair by the window, Lisa watched the scene unfold with tears streaming down her face. The nurse stood transfixed in the doorway, witnessing the connection between child and dog that transcended the clinical setting around them. In that moment, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right decision. Whatever challenges lay ahead in Rex's rehabilitation, this visit had just proven what she had suspected all along. The beast of Pinewood was gone for good. In his place stood Rex, damaged, healing, and capable of extraordinary connection. The hospital visit changed everything. News of Rex's gentle behavior with the injured Emma spread through Pinewood with the speed of summer lightning, transforming the community's perception almost overnight. The Beast of Pinewood was recast as the Miracle Dog, his story embellished with each retelling until even Sarah barely recognized the narrative being shared in coffee shops and supermarket aisles. "I heard he sensed the accident before it happened," Mrs. Winters told Sarah during her cat's next appointment. "That's why he was so agitated that weekend. He knew Emma was in danger." Sarah didn't bother correcting these fanciful interpretations. The truth, that Rex was a traumatized animal slowly learning to trust again, was less dramatic, but no less remarkable. And if the town's newfound admiration made his rehabilitation easier, she was happy to let the legend grow. The real changes, however, were happening at the clinic. Following the successful hospital visit, Dr. Patil had recommended gradually expanding Rex's world beyond the confines of his kennel. "He's proven he can handle a controlled new environment," the behaviorist had explained during their follow-up call. The next step is to increase his freedom in familiar surroundings, then gradually introduce new experiences. And so, with meticulous planning and careful supervision, Sarah began allowing Rex short periods outside his kennel within the clinic. First in the examination room during quiet hours, then in her office while she worked, and eventually in the small fenced yard behind the clinic where staff typically took their lunch breaks. Rex approached each new freedom with cautious curiosity rather than fear, a dramatic departure from his earlier behavior. He still startled at unexpected noises and remained wary of strangers, particularly men, but his recovery was progressing faster than Sarah had dared to hope. Emma, her leg still in a cast but otherwise recovering well, returned to her daily visits 2 weeks after the accident. Her mother would drop her off in the morning on her way to work at the hospital, and Emma would spend the day at the clinic, reading to Rex, helping Miguel with simple tasks, and now, participating actively in Rex's rehabilitation. "Today we're going to practice walking on a loose leash," Sarah explained as she fitted Rex with his harness one sunny August morning. "Emma, you'll hold this target stick and reward him whenever he looks at it." Emma nodded solemnly, accepting the clicker and treat pouch that Sarah handed her. "Will the other dogs be scared of him?" It was a perceptive question. Despite his progress, Rex still carried himself with the alert vigilance of a guard dog, his size and focused intensity potentially intimidating to other animals. "That's something we'll need to find out," Sarah admitted, "which is why we're starting with Mabel." Mabel, a placid golden retriever recovering from ACL surgery, was perhaps the least reactive dog in the clinic. When Miguel brought her into the exercise yard, she regarded Rex with mild interest, before flopping down in a patch of shade, apparently unimpressed by the former beast of Pinewood. Rex, however, was fascinated. He stared at Mabel with such intensity that Sarah worried he might revert to his defensive behavior. Instead, after several minutes of observation, he looked up at Sarah as if seeking guidance. "It's okay," she assured him. "She's a friend." With exquisite care, Rex approached the reclining retriever, his body language communicating uncertainty rather than threat. Mabel yawned dramatically, then extended her muzzle toward him in a gentle greeting. The interaction was brief but significant, Rex's first positive experience with another dog in what might have been years. "He likes her," Emma whispered excitedly, clutching the target stick to her chest. "He's learning that other dogs aren't threats," Sarah corrected gently. "It's an important step." Over the next week, Rex was gradually introduced to other dogs at the clinic, always in controlled circumstances, always with Emma and Sarah present. Some interactions went better than others. A nervous terrier provoked a moment of tension that required Sarah's intervention, but a friendly lab mix named Cooper actually engaged Rex in a brief playbow, eliciting an awkward but unmistakable play response from the former guard dog. "Did you see that?" Emma had exclaimed, her eyes wide with delight. He was playing. These small victories accumulated, forming a foundation for the larger question that Sarah knew they would eventually have to address. What would happen to Rex long term? The clinic could not be his permanent home, and while he had bonded with Emma, the girl's mother had made it clear that their small apartment and her long work hours made adoption impossible. The question became more urgent when Dave Holloway stopped by the clinic one afternoon, his expression serious beneath his official police chief demeanor. "Sarah," he greeted her, declining her offer of coffee. "We need to talk about the dog." "Rex," she corrected automatically. "What about him?" Dave sighed, removing his hat. "The county's finished clearing Miller's property. They're putting the land up for auction next month. Some developer from the city's interested in building townhouses." Sarah nodded, unsure why this necessitated a discussion about Rex. "The thing is," Dave continued, "the town council's been getting inquiries about the dog, Rex. Word's gotten out about his transformation, and people are curious. There's talk of making him some kind of town mascot. A mascot? Sarah couldn't hide her dismay. He's not a prop for community relations, Dave. He's a living being with complex needs. I know that, Dave said, holding up a placating hand. But you have to admit, his story's pretty compelling. The feared beast who turned out to be a hero, saved by the kindness of a little girl. It's straight out of a movie. Sarah shook her head, frustrated by the simplistic narrative. It's not that straightforward. Rex has made incredible progress, but he still has issues. He needs a structured environment with someone who understands his triggers and can continue his rehabilitation. Which brings me to the real reason I'm here, Dave said. The council's allocated funds for what they're calling the Pinewood Canine Rehabilitation Initiative. They want to establish a program to help other dogs like Rex, and they're offering you a grant to develop it. Sarah stared at him, momentarily speechless. Me? Who else? You've done what nobody thought possible with Rex. They're prepared to provide funding for equipment, training, even a part-time assistant. All they ask is that Rex remain as the ambassador for the program. The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. Sarah had been struggling with the clinic's finances for years, often taking on pro bono cases that her accountant warned would eventually put her out of business. A funded rehabilitation program could transform her practice while allowing her to focus on the work she found most meaningful. But there was still the question of Rex himself. He still needs a home, Dave. A real home, not just a kennel at the clinic. Dave nodded. I understand. But this buys you time to find the right situation for him, without financial pressure. After Dave left, Sarah found herself standing in the doorway of her office, watching Emma read to Rex in the examination room. The dog lay with his head on his paws, his eyes fixed on the girl's animated face as she recounted the adventures of a time-traveling canine detective. Dr. Chen, Emma called when she noticed Sarah. Rex figured out who the mystery criminal was before I did. He barked right when I read the part about the missing watch. Sarah smiled, moving to join them. He's very smart. How would you like to help me with something new, Emma? Something that might help other dogs like Rex? Emma's eyes widened. Like a dog rescue? Sort of. More like a rehabilitation center for dogs who need extra help before they can find homes. Sarah sat beside Emma, scratching Rex behind the ears. The town council is offering to fund a program, and they want Rex to be the face of it. Like a famous dog? Emma asked, clearly intrigued by the idea. More like a teacher, Sarah explained. His journey could help people understand how to help other dogs with similar issues. Rex shifted his position, resting his head on Emma's knee in a gesture that had become familiar in recent weeks. The dog who once terrified the neighborhood now sought comfort from a child, his fierce exterior softening to reveal the gentle soul that had been hidden beneath layers of fear and defensive aggression. But what about when I go back to school? Emma asked, voicing the concern that had been weighing on Sarah's mind. I won't be able to come every day anymore. It was a valid question, one that highlighted the precarious nature of Rex's rehabilitation. His progress was remarkable but still dependent on the stable routine they had established. Changes were coming whether they were ready or not. That's something we'll need to figure out, Sarah admitted. Rex has come a long way, but his journey isn't over yet. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. Maybe he could come to school with me, for show and tell. The image of Rex in a classroom full of excitable children made Sarah wince internally, though she kept her expression neutral. Let's start with smaller steps. In fact, I've been thinking about an outing that might be good practice for both of you. The outing that Sarah had in mind was a visit to Miller's old property. With the house demolished and the land cleared, the space had been temporarily fenced off pending the upcoming auction. Dave had arranged for special access allowing Sarah to bring Rex to the place that had been his territory for so long. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Lisa asked as she helped Emma into the front seat of Sarah's SUV. Rex was already settled in the back, secured with a special harness that attached to the seatbelt. "Won't it be confusing for him to go back there?" "It's called closure," Sarah explained, checking that Emma's seatbelt was properly fastened. "Dr. Patel thinks it might help Rex process the changes in his life if he can see that his old home is gone. Plus, it's a controlled environment for him to experience more freedom than the clinic yard allows." Emma reached back to stroke Rex's head. "He looks excited." Indeed, Rex was more alert than usual, his nose working overtime as he processed the familiar sense of the car that had now taken him on several short journeys. What had once caused anxiety, car rides, new environments, interactions with strangers, was gradually becoming routine, each positive experience building his confidence. The drive to Miller's property took less than 10 minutes. When they pulled up to the now empty lot, Sarah was struck by how different it looked without the dilapidated house and overgrown vegetation. The space was bare dirt and gravel, with only the outline of the former foundation visible like a scar on the earth. "It looks sad," Emma observed as they carefully helped Rex out of the car. The dog stood rigidly, his tail held low as he surveyed his former territory. "It does now," Sarah agreed, keeping a firm but gentle hold on Rex's leash. "But eventually something new will be built here. That's how life works. Endings make room for beginnings." Rex's reaction to the transformed landscape was not what Sarah had expected. Rather than anxiety or territoriality, he displayed intense curiosity, pulling gently at the leash as he sought to investigate every corner of the property. His nose worked constantly, sampling the air and ground as if reading a complex story written in scent. "He remembers," Emma said with certainty as they followed Rex's deliberate exploration. "He's looking for Mr. Miller." The observation sent a pang through Sarah's heart. Despite Miller's neglect, Rex had remained fiercely loyal, to the point of trying to summon help when his owner was in distress. That loyalty, misplaced yet unwavering, was the core of Rex's character, a foundation upon which his rehabilitation could build. They allowed Rex to lead them around the perimeter of the property, stopping occasionally when something captured his particular interest. The corner where Miller's shed had stood, the spot beneath a large oak tree that had survived the clearing, and finally, the area where his kennel had been located. At this last spot, Rex stopped and sat, looking back at Sarah with an expression that seemed almost contemplative. For several minutes he remained still, surveying the empty space where he had spent years confined, barking his warnings to a neighborhood that had feared and misunderstood him. "I think he's saying goodbye," Emma whispered, crouching beside Rex. Sarah nodded, too moved to speak. This moment, a dog processing the end of one chapter in his life, struck her as profound in its simplicity. For all their professional knowledge about canine behavior, there were aspects of a dog's emotional life that humans could only glimpse, never fully comprehend. After their visit to Miller's property, Rex's rehabilitation entered a new phase. With the town council's funding, Sarah was able to hire a part-time assistant specifically for the rehabilitation program, a recent graduate named Tyler, who specialized in behavioral work. Together, they developed a more structured training regimen for Rex, focusing on real-world skills he would need if he were to eventually find a permanent home. Emma, now back in school, still visited daily, but could only stay for an hour or so. The reduced time with his favorite human had initially distressed Rex, but with careful planning, they had turned the transitions into positive experiences. "When Emma leaves, good things happen," Sarah explained to Tyler as they watched Rex receive a stuffed Kong toy immediately after the girl's departure. "We need to reshape his association with her absence." These strategies were working. Rex still perked up when Emma arrived and watched sadly when she left, but the frantic anxiety he had displayed during her weekend away was gone. He was learning that people could leave and return, that absence didn't mean abandonment. As August gave way to September, Rex's story continued to spread beyond Pinewood. A reporter from the regional newspaper wrote a feature about him, complete with photographs of Rex and Emma during a training session. A local television station ran a short segment about the town's new canine rehabilitation initiative, featuring interviews with Sarah and Dave. There was even talk of Rex making an appearance at the annual Pinewood Harvest Festival, an idea that Sarah approached with cautious optimism. "He's handled small groups well," she told Dr. Patel during their weekly video consultation. "But a festival would be a completely different level of stimulation." Dr. Patel nodded thoughtfully. "What does your gut tell you? You know him better than anyone at this point." Sarah considered the question. Rex had exceeded her expectations at every turn, demonstrating resilience and adaptability that she wouldn't have believed possible 2 months ago. Yet she remained protective of his progress, wary of pushing too far too fast. "I think he could handle a controlled appearance," she said finally. "Something short, in a defined space with clear boundaries for the public." They began preparing Rex for the festival with carefully staged simulations. Tyler would bring friends to the clinic to create small crowds, gradually increasing the number of people and the level of noise. Emma recruited classmates to help, teaching them how to behave around Rex. No sudden movements, no reaching over his head, no loud voices. Rex handled these rehearsals with remarkable composure, especially when Emma was nearby. His confidence grew visibly with each successful interaction, his body language shifting from vigilant tension to alert but relaxed attention. Then, a week before the festival, an unexpected visitor arrived at the clinic. "There's a man here asking about Rex," Miguel reported, his expression concerned. "Says his name is James Reeves. He seems to know a lot about him." Sarah frowned. The name wasn't familiar, and after all the publicity, they'd had several people express interest in Rex, from potential adopters to well-meaning individuals offering unsolicited advice about his care. "Did he say what he wants specifically?" Miguel lowered his voice, though Rex was safely in the back room with Tyler. "He says he used to own Rex. Before Miller." Sarah felt a chill run through her. Rex's history before arriving at Miller's property was largely unknown, though his scars and behavioral issues pointed to a traumatic past. If this man was indeed Rex's former owner, his appearance could represent anything from a valuable piece of Rex's history to a potential threat to his recovery. "Where is he now?" "Waiting room. I told him you were with a patient." Sarah nodded gratefully. "Good. Please ask Tyler to make sure Rex stays in the back, away from the waiting area. I'll speak with Mr. Reeves." The man waiting in the clinic's small lobby was not what Sarah had expected. Middle-aged, with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard, James Reeves was dressed in the uniform of a park ranger, his demeanor professional and calm. He rose when Sarah entered, extending his hand. "Dr. Chen, thank you for seeing me. I apologize for dropping in without an appointment." Sarah shook his hand, studying him carefully. "Miguel tells me you have some connection to Rex." Reeves nodded, his expression turning somber. "I was his handler. Rex was a search and rescue dog with the Forest Service for 2 years. One of the best I've ever worked with." Of all the possible revelations about Rex's past, this was perhaps the last thing Sarah had expected. Search and rescue, but his behavior when he came to us, his aggression, his fear responses. "May I sit?" Reeves asked, gesturing to the chairs. When Sarah nodded, he continued, his voice low and controlled, though she could detect an undercurrent of emotion. "Rex and I worked together in the Sierra Nevada mountains. He specialized in wilderness searches, lost hikers, missing children. He had 17 successful finds in 2 years. What happened? Sarah asked, sensing there was much more to the story. Reeves clasped his hands together, his knuckles whitening slightly. There was an accident, a rock slide during a search for a missing backpacker. He was buried for almost 6 hours before we could dig him out. By the time we got him to a vet, he was in shock, severely injured. Sarah felt a wave of sympathy both for Rex and for the man before her. That explains some of his physical scars. The physical injuries healed, Reeves continued, but he wasn't the same afterward. He developed severe anxiety, noise phobias. He couldn't work anymore, would panic at the sound of falling rocks or rushing water. He paused, visibly collecting himself. I tried to rehabilitate him myself, but I didn't have the skills. Eventually, the program administrator decided he needed to be rehomed to a quiet environment where he wouldn't be triggered. And that's how he ended up with Miller? Sarah asked, struggling to connect this new information with what she knew of Rex's history. Reeves shook his head, pain evident in his expression. No. I placed him with a retired park ranger named Carl Jennings. Carl was experienced with working dogs and lived in a quiet rural area. It seemed perfect. But something went wrong, Sarah prompted when Reeves fell silent. Carl died about 8 months after taking Rex. Heart attack. Reeves ran a hand through his graying hair. I was overseas on assignment when it happened. By the time I found out and tried to track Rex down, he had been passed through 2 different homes and then sold to Miller. The trail went cold. I searched for over a year. Sarah tried to process this new information, to reconcile the frightening guard dog she had first encountered with the highly trained search and rescue animal Reeves described. How did you find him now? Pure luck. I was visiting my sister in the next county over when I saw the newspaper article about the miracle dog of Pinewood. There was a photo. Reeves pulled a folded newspaper clipping from his pocket, smoothing it carefully on his knee. I recognized him immediately, even with the changes in his appearance. The photo showed Rex and Emma during a training session, the dog's attention focused intently on the girl as she held out a target for him to touch with his nose. Even in the grainy newspaper image, their connection was evident. I had to come, Reeves continued. I had to see for myself if it was really him, and to find out if he's okay now. Sarah studied the man before her, weighing his story against what she knew of Rex. The narrative filled in critical gaps, explaining not just Rex's scars, but the foundation of training that had allowed him to progress so rapidly in his rehabilitation once he began to trust again. Would you like to see him? She asked finally. Reeves looked up sharply, hope and apprehension mingling in his expression. Would that be possible? I don't want to disrupt his progress or cause him any distress. We'll be careful, Sarah assured him, though she shared his concern. How would Rex react to seeing his former handler after years of separation and trauma? Wait here. I'll check on his status first and make arrangements. In the back room, she found Tyler working with Rex on a new command, middle, where the dog would position himself between a handler's legs, a useful position for moving through crowds safely. Tyler, something's come up. Can you take Rex to my office and stay with him there? I need to prepare him for a visitor. Tyler looked curious but didn't question her. Sure thing. We were about done here anyway. Rex has been nailing this command. Once they had moved to her office, Sarah explained the situation briefly. Tyler's eyes widened with surprise. A search and rescue dog? That explains so much. His intelligence, his focus, the way he picks up commands so quickly. But what are you going to do about this guy? What if he wants Rex back? It was a question that had been lurking at the edges of Sarah's thoughts since Reeves had revealed his connection to Rex. One step at a time. First, Let's see how Rex reacts to him. She approached Rex, who was resting comfortably on the dog bed she kept in her office. "Hey, buddy. There's someone here who used to know you. We're going to be very careful, okay?" Rex looked up at her, his amber eyes trusting. How far he had come from the defensive, frightened animal she had first encountered in Miller's yard. She attached his leash and made sure his support harness was secure before texting Miguel to bring Reeves to her office. When the door opened, Sarah kept a close eye on Rex, ready to intervene at the first sign of distress. The dog's initial reaction was alertness, ears forward, body tense but not fearful. Then Reeves stepped fully into the room, and something extraordinary happened. Rex's entire demeanor transformed. His ears perked up completely. His tail began to wag tentatively, and he made a soft whining sound in the back of his throat, a sound Sarah had never heard from him before. "Atlas," Reeves said softly, using what must have been Rex's original name. "Hey, buddy. It's been a long time." At the sound of that name, Rex's tail began to wag more vigorously. He looked from Sarah to Reeves and back as if seeking permission or confirmation. "It's okay," Sarah assured him, loosening her grip on the leash slightly. Rex moved forward cautiously, his nose working overtime as he processed the scent of his former handler. When he reached Reeves, he stretched his neck forward, sniffing the man's hands and clothes intensely. Reeves remained perfectly still, allowing Rex to investigate at his own pace. "You look good, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" After what seemed like an eternity, Rex did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He leaned his body against Reeves's legs and looked up at the man's face, his tail sweeping in wide, joyful arcs. It was a gesture of recognition, of remembered connection. Reeves knelt slowly, bringing himself to Rex's level. "May I?" he asked Sarah. She nodded, too moved to speak. With gentle hands, Reeves stroked Rex's head and neck, finding a spot behind his ear that made the dog's eyes close in contentment. "Good boy, Atlas. Good boy." The reunion continued for several minutes, Rex growing increasingly relaxed and affectionate, while Reeves spoke to him in soft tones, occasionally using commands or phrases that clearly held meaning from their shared past. "He remembers you," Sarah said finally. "I've never seen him respond to anyone like this except maybe Emma." "Emma, the little girl from the newspaper?" Reeves asked, still focused primarily on Rex. Sarah nodded. "They have a special bond. She's been instrumental in his rehabilitation." Eventually, they moved to the chairs in her office, Rex settling comfortably at Reeves's feet, as if no time had passed since they had last been together. "What are your intentions?" Sarah asked directly. "Now that you've found him." Reeves looked down at Rex, his expression complicated. "Honestly, I came here not knowing what I would find. I wasn't sure if he would even remember me or if he'd be so traumatized that seeing me would make things worse. But now I see that he's found his way back to himself, thanks to you and this Emma." Reeves met her gaze directly. "I didn't come to disrupt his life again. I came for closure, for both of us." Sarah felt a wave of relief, followed quickly by guilt for feeling relieved. "You don't want to take him back?" "My life isn't set up for that anymore," Reeves admitted. "I'm still with the Forest Service, still active in the field. I'm gone for weeks at a time. It wouldn't be fair to him." He scratched behind Rex's ear again, earning another contented sigh from the dog. "But I would like to be part of his life again, if that's possible. To visit when I can, maybe help with his continued training." Before Sarah could respond, the office door burst open, and Emma rushed in, her backpack still on, clearly having come straight from school. "Dr. Chen, Miguel said there's a—" She stopped abruptly, taking in the scene before her. Rex sitting calmly beside a stranger, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "Who are you?" she asked Reeves directly, a protective note in her voice. "Emma, this is Mr. Reeves," Sarah explained quickly. "He used to work with Rex a long time ago, before Rex came to live with Mr. Miller." Emma approached cautiously, studying Reeves with the same careful assessment Rex had demonstrated earlier. "What kind of work?" "Rex, or Atlas as I knew him, was a search and rescue dog," Reeves explained, clearly recognizing the importance of this small human to Rex. "He helped find lost people in the mountains." Emma's eyes widened. "Atlas? That's his real name?" "It was his working name," Reeves confirmed. "But I think he's gotten used to Rex now." Emma processed this information, then nodded decisively. "That's why he's so smart and brave." She knelt beside Rex, who greeted her with the same affection he had always shown her. "You were a hero dog all along." The simple statement hung in the air, a truth that contextualized everything they had learned about Rex's behavior and abilities. He had never been the beast of Pinewood. He had been a hero all along, a trained professional traumatized by circumstances beyond his control. "He still is a hero," Reeves said softly. "Look at all the people he's helping now." Over the next hour, Reeves shared more details about Rex's training and career, the specialized scent work he had mastered, the challenging rescues he had participated in, the medals and commendations he had received. Emma listened raptly, occasionally glancing at Rex as if seeing him in an entirely new light. "Can you show us some of his old commands?" she asked eventually. "The ones he knew when he was working?" Reeves looked to Sarah for permission, which she granted with a nod. They moved to the exercise yard behind the clinic, where Reeves demonstrated a series of hand signals and verbal commands. To everyone's amazement, Rex responded to many of them, sometimes with perfect precision, other times with a confused head tilt that suggested partial memory. "His training is still in there," Reeves explained. "It's like riding a bicycle. The muscle memory remains, even if it gets rusty from disuse." As the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah found herself contemplating what this new information meant for Rex's future. The revelation of his past as a working dog opened possibilities she hadn't previously considered, and perhaps provided the answer to the question of what his permanent home should look like. Later, after Reeves had reluctantly departed with promises to return soon, Sarah watched Emma brushing Rex in the quiet clinic, the girls still processing everything they had learned. "Atlas, the hero dog," Emma murmured, running the brush gently through Rex's gleaming coat. "But I think I like Rex better. Atlas sounds like a superhero name, but Rex sounds like a friend." Sarah smiled, recognizing the wisdom in the child's simple observation. "I think you're right, and I think I might have an idea about Rex's future." The Pinewood Harvest Festival was held on the town square on the first Saturday of October. Tents and booths lined the perimeter, offering everything from homemade preserves to handcrafted jewelry. Children darted between hay bales and cornstalk decorations, their laughter mingling with the sounds of a local bluegrass band playing on a small stage. In a quiet corner, slightly removed from the main festivities, a special area had been set up with a professional banner reading Pinewood Canine Rehabilitation Initiative. Sarah stood beside a display of before and after photos showing Rex's transformation, fielding questions from a steady stream of interested visitors. "He'll be here at noon," she explained to a woman curious about meeting the famous dog in person. "We're limiting his time at the festival to avoid overwhelming him." Rex's appearance had been carefully planned. He would arrive for exactly 1 hour, remain within a designated area where interactions could be controlled, and leave before the afternoon crowd reached its peak. Emma would be with him throughout, along with Tyler, and somewhat surprisingly, James Reeves, who had arranged to take personal leave to attend the event. As noon approached, Sarah checked her watch and scanned the crowd for any potential issues. Dave had stationed 2 officers nearby, not because he expected trouble, but as a precaution given the size of the gathering. "Dr. Chen," a familiar voice called out. Sarah turned to see Mrs. Winters approaching, her expression animated. "I've been telling everyone about your wonderful program. My sister in Oak Ridge has a rescue dog with some behavioral issues, and I've convinced her to bring him in for an evaluation." Sarah smiled, reflecting on how dramatically public perception had shifted. The same people who had once demanded something be done about the Beast of Pinewood were now eager supporters of canine rehabilitation. "We'd be happy to help," she assured Mrs. Winters. "That's exactly what this program is designed for." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Lisa's car pulled up at the designated drop-off point. Tyler approached the vehicle first, ensuring the path was clear and that spectators maintained an appropriate distance. Then, with deliberate calmness, Lisa opened the back door. Rex emerged with dignified confidence, his coat gleaming in the autumn sunlight, the bright blue therapy dog vest he wore, providing both identification and a subtle reminder of his professional status. Emma exited behind him, holding his leash loosely, as they had practiced countless times. Reeves followed, maintaining a watchful but unobtrusive presence. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a collective gasp followed by applause. Rex's ears flicked forward at the sound, but he remained focused on Emma, moving beside her with the steady confidence of a dog who knew his job. "Remember, everyone," Sarah announced as they approached the tent. "Please stay behind the marked line, keep voices low, and no flash photography. Rex is still in training." To Sarah's relief, the crowd complied, their excitement tempered by genuine respect for the dog's needs. Rex and Emma took their positions in the center of the designated area, where children could approach one at a time to meet the famous dog under careful supervision. "He's so big," exclaimed a small boy, his eyes wide as he offered Rex the approved treat Sarah had provided. "He used to find lost people in the mountains," Emma explained proudly. "He's a hero dog." For the next hour, Rex greeted visitors with remarkable composure, occasionally looking to Emma or Sarah for reassurance, but showing no signs of the fear or aggression that had once defined him. When a toddler stumbled and fell nearby, causing a brief commotion, Rex merely watched with alert interest rather than alarm, a testament to how far he had come. As the scheduled hour drew to a close, Dave approached the tent, smiling broadly beneath his official police chief demeanor. "Quite a turnout," he observed. "Looks like your program is going to be a success." Sarah nodded, watching as Tyler began the process of guiding Rex and Emma toward the exit point. "It's a good start, but we still have a lot of work to do. Speaking of which," Dave lowered his voice slightly, "has the council made a decision about your proposal?" "We're meeting Monday," Sarah replied, "but the initial feedback has been positive." Dave nodded approvingly. "Well, I've done my part to support it. Can't think of a better use for that property." As Rex and his entourage prepared to leave, a final visitor pushed through the crowd. Margaret Winters again, this time accompanied by a frail elderly man leaning heavily on a walker. "Dr. Chen," she called, slightly breathless. "This is my brother-in-law, Thomas. He was one of the search and rescue volunteers who worked with Rex, Atlas back then, during his service years. He saw the article in the paper and wanted to meet him again." Sarah glanced at Reeves, who stepped forward with recognition in his eyes. "Tom Barrett. I didn't know you were living in this area now." The elderly man's weathered face broke into a smile. "Retired here 3 years ago. Never thought I'd see this old boy again." He looked at Rex with undisguised emotion. "We were on that last mission together, you know. The rock slide." A small circle of silence formed around them as festival-goers sensed the significance of the moment. Emma, sensing it too, carefully guided Rex toward the old man. "Would you like to say hello?" she asked softly. Thomas nodded, his gnarled hand trembling slightly as he extended it toward Rex. The dog sniffed carefully, then, in a gesture that brought tears to several observers' eyes, gently pressed his head against the old man's hand. "He remembers," Thomas whispered. "After all this time, he remembers." The moment hung in the air, a perfect encapsulation of Rex's journey, from dedicated working dog to fearsome guard dog to the balanced, confident animal who stood before them now, capable of both remembering his past and embracing his future. Later that evening, after the festival had wound down and Rex was resting comfortably at the clinic, Sarah met with Lisa, Emma, Reeves, and Tyler to discuss the next phase of their plan. "The council seems receptive to the idea," Sarah explained, spreading architectural renderings across her desk. "Converting Miller's property into a permanent home for the Canine Rehabilitation Initiative would provide enough space for training facilities, housing for dogs in the program, and educational areas for community outreach." "And Rex would live there?" Emma asked, the question that mattered most to her. Sarah smiled. "Rex would be the resident ambassador. He'd have his own comfortable living quarters. But more importantly, he'd have a job again, helping other dogs overcome their fears and challenges. With proper supervision and care," Reeves added. "Sarah's asked me to consult on designing a program that incorporates elements of his search and rescue training into therapy work. Dogs like Rex need mental stimulation and purpose. And I'll still get to see him, right?" Emma's voice held a note of anxiety that reminded them all of her age, despite her maturity in handling Rex. "Every day if you want," Sarah assured her. "In fact, the proposal includes an after-school program where kids can help with the rehabilitation process, just like you did with Rex. You'd be our first junior trainer." Emma's face lit up with a smile that rivaled the festival lights. "I could teach other kids how to help scared dogs." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "Your experience with Rex is invaluable." As the meeting concluded and the others prepared to leave, Sarah found herself alone with Rex in the quiet clinic. The dog watched her with those intelligent amber eyes that had once blazed with fear and distrust, but now held calm confidence. "You've come a long way," she told him, scratching behind his ears in the spot that Reeves had shown her, his favorite since puppyhood. "From hero to villain and back to hero again." Rex sighed contentedly, leaning against her leg in a gesture of trust that still amazed her when she remembered their first encounters. The journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead. Securing the funding for the rehabilitation center, developing programs that could help other traumatized dogs, continuing Rex's own healing process. But for the first time, Sarah felt absolute certainty that they were on the right path. Outside the clinic window, the lights of Pinewood twinkled in the autumn dusk. Somewhere in that small town, other dogs were waiting, forgotten, misunderstood, labeled as dangerous or unmanageable. Dogs whose stories, like Rex's, were more complex than their reputations suggested. Dogs who deserved a second chance, thanks to one remarkable German Shepherd and a persistent 10-year-old girl who had refused to believe in monsters. Those dogs would now have hope. Rex yawned widely, then settled onto his bed with the contented sigh of an animal who knows he is exactly where he belongs. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that with patience, understanding, and unconditional love, even the most fearsome beast could find his way home to the hero that had always lived within.